Don't get in the car, Daddy. My 5-year-old's voice stopped me cold. I opened the door anyway, and found a forged loan notice taped to the steering wheel for $175,000 I never borrowed. Within hours, my accounts were locked, my reputation shredded, and vendors were pulling out. But what hit harder than the scam? My own brother-in-law, the man I'd trusted with payroll, offered to buy my company for pennies, right after helping tank it. That's when I realized this wasn't sabotage. It was a takeover. He thought I'd break. He forgot who taught me to keep the receipts. Now he's walking into a meeting he thinks he owns, and I'm already recording. My name is Michael Whitaker, and I'm 45 years old. I run a small automotive supply business that I built from scratch, where the scent of motor oil mingles with burnt coffee from our break room. My brother-in-law, Mark, helps with payroll and logistics, always quick with a solution, though his smiles never quite reach his eyes. My wife, Sarah, trusts him completely, which should ease my mind. Tom, my retired accountant mentor, taught me to keep meticulous records of every transaction, advice I've followed religiously. My 5-year-old daughter Katie's bedtime questions are the highlight of my day, though lately she watches Mark with wary eyes during family dinners. I've noticed decisions being made without my input, as if someone else is steering my company from the shadows. But let me start from the beginning. I always start my workday before sunrise. It's quiet then. Just me and my thoughts while I tie my steel-toed boots and grab my truck keys from the hook by the door. That morning was no different, except it was. You know how sometimes you can feel something's off, even when everything looks normal? I was reaching for the doorknob when I felt a small tug on my sleeve. Katie, my 5-year-old, stood there in her pink pajamas, clutching my arm with unusual intensity. Now, Katie's always been perceptive, notices things most kids her age wouldn't. But what she said next stopped me cold. "Daddy, don't get in your car." I crouched down to her level, catching a whiff of her strawberry shampoo. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" She just shook her head, those big brown eyes of hers dead serious. "Just don't." You ever have one of those moments where your kid says something that sends a chill right through you? That was one of them. Still, I had a business to run. I kissed her forehead and stepped outside into the pre-dawn darkness, where the smell of rain hung heavy on the asphalt. The security light cast long shadows across my pickup as I approached. Everything looked normal enough, but Katie's words kept echoing in my head. I pulled open the driver's door and there it was. A plain white envelope taped to my steering wheel. My hands weren't quite steady as I tore it open. The letter inside was typed, professional looking. Final notice. Repayment of a $175,000 loan due immediately. Below that was my signature, except I'd never signed anything like this. Never taken out any such loan. "Everything okay, Mike?" I nearly jumped out of my skin. Mark was standing in the kitchen doorway, coffee mug in hand, looking concerned. Though thinking back now, maybe a little too concerned. "Found this on my steering wheel," I said, holding up the letter. He stepped closer, hand outstretched. "Mind if I take a look?" I handed it over, watching his face as he read. My stomach was doing somersaults by then, especially looking at that signature. It was good. Damn good. Close enough to fool most people, but I knew my own handwriting. "Let's check your accounts," Mark suggested, following me back inside. Could be some mix-up. I settled at the kitchen counter with my laptop while Mark hovered behind me, drumming his fingers on the granite. The familiar online banking screen loaded up, and that's when everything went sideways. There they were, withdrawal after withdrawal, spread out over the past few months. Vendor names I'd never heard of. Summit Financial Holdings, Crown Point Investments, Maritime Credit Union. Each one authorized with my name. Each one a punch to the gut. "That's not possible," I muttered, clicking through the transactions. 10,000 here, 20,000 there. The numbers started swimming before my eyes. Mark leaned in closer. "Want me to make some calls? I know people who can help sort this out." I barely heard him. My finger was already hitting the dispute button, and that's when the final bomb dropped. A red alert flashed across my screen. "Notice. Due to suspicious activity, this account may be subject to temporary restrictions." Movement caught my eye. Katie standing in the hallway, clutching her stuffed rabbit, Mr. Hoppy. She was watching us with those same serious eyes that had warned me not to get in my car. The kitchen clock ticked steadily toward opening time, each click like a hammer, falling. My throat felt dry as sandpaper. "Mark, I need you to handle the morning deliveries. I've got some calls to make." He nodded, all helpfulness and concern, but something in his expression made my skin crawl, or maybe that was just the cold dread settling into my bones as I stared at that flashing alert. I led Mark into my office around 9, Coffee untouched and getting cold on my desk. Didn't want him there if I'm being honest. But what choice did I have? The morning's chaos had left me reeling, and he was the only one offering help. "Look, Mike," he said, settling into the chair across from me. "I deal with bankers all the time. Let me handle this before it spirals. All I need is view-only access to monitor the situation. Remember when you were a kid and had to swallow medicine you knew would taste awful? That's how I felt right then. But with payroll coming up and those mysterious withdrawals hanging over my head, I couldn't afford pride. "Fine," I said, turning my monitor so we could both see it. "But we do this together." I logged into the banking portal, set up his viewer credentials right there. Should have noticed how his eyes lit up when those account numbers appeared. Should have seen a lot of things. The first call came before we'd even finished setting up his access. Johnson Supply, one of our oldest vendors. I reached for the phone, but Mark was quicker. "Mike Whitaker's office," he answered smoothly. Then his face got serious. "Yes, I understand your concerns about the outstanding balance." My stomach dropped as I listened to his side of the conversation. Words like bad paper and immediate resolution drifted across my desk. Mark's voice stayed calm, professional, like he was born for this role. "We're implementing a consolidation plan," he assured them. "I'll personally oversee the transition." I sat there, jaw clenched, because that was the first I'd heard of any consolidation plan. Through the glass wall of my office, I could see Sarah and Jim huddled by the water cooler, throwing glances my way. 15 years I'd run this company, built it on straight talk and solid deals, and now my own people were whispering. The second call hit before lunch. Superior Parts, threatening to cut off our supply chain by Friday unless we cleared our balance. Mark handled that one too, using the same smooth talk about consolidation and oversight. Each time he spoke, it sounded less like he was helping and more like he was running things. You know that feeling when you're swimming and suddenly can't touch bottom? That's what it felt like, watching him work. Every call, every decision, pulled me a little further from shore. I printed out that steering wheel note, my hands still shaking slightly at the sight of that forged signature. Stapled it into a fresh file labeled "Dispute" in thick black marker. The office air felt different now, thin and metallic, like before a storm. The bank portal kept pinging with login notifications. Mark's monitoring was starting to look more like hovering, but every time I questioned it, he had a ready answer about staying on top of the situation. By closing time, my inbox was stuffed with vendor ultimatums. Each one demanded payment, each one copied to Mark. Somehow he'd managed to insert himself into every conversation, every negotiation. Was he holding me up or holding me down? I couldn't tell anymore. The final blow came just as I was reaching for my keys. That automated bank voice, clinical and cold. "This is an important message regarding your accounts. Due to suspicious activity, a review has been initiated. Operating funds may be temporarily restricted within the next 24 hours. Let me ask you something. Ever had your whole world start crumbling, and the only person offering to help might be the one holding the sledgehammer?" The next morning hit like a hammer. 6 a.m., and my phone was already screaming notifications. I thumbed through them in bed, each one worse than the last, until I hit the bank's message. "Account access restricted pending investigation." My hands shook as I knotted my tie. 15 years of building trust, of shaking hands and keeping my word. And now this. The drizzle outside matched my mood as I backed the truck out of the driveway, wipers smearing gray across the windshield. The bank lobby smelled like it always did. That mix of paper and carpet cleaner that's supposed to smell like money. But today it just smelled like trouble. The young teller took one look at my account number and went straight for her manager. Ever notice how time moves different when you're waiting for bad news? Those 10 minutes felt like hours. "Mr. Whitaker?" The manager appeared, all pressed suit and practiced sympathy. "Please come to my office." I'd sat in that same chair dozens of times over the years, discussing expansion loans, property purchases. Now I felt like a teenager in the principal's office, watching her scan her computer screen with a frown that kept getting deeper. "I have to be direct," she said, shifting some papers. "We've identified irregular withdrawal patterns connected to several substantial loans taken out under your authorization." She might as well have been reading a weather report for all the emotion in her voice. "Given the circumstances, we're implementing an immediate account freeze." My throat went dry. "Loans? What loans?" She slid a printout across the desk. There they were. 3 loans I'd never seen before, each one with my signature at the bottom. Perfect forgeries, just like the note on my steering wheel. "You have 30 days to address the outstanding balance," she continued, "or we'll have to pursue more aggressive collection measures." When I walked out to the parking lot, The drizzle had turned to a proper rain. Felt fitting, somehow. I sat in my truck, scrolling through my phone's contact list, calling suppliers one by one. You ever heard respect drain out of someone's voice? It's like watching coffee spill across a white tablecloth. Once it starts spreading, there's no stopping it. "Mike," said Pete from Anderson Supply, a guy I'd known for 12 years. "Word's getting around that you've been floating bad paper. I can't extend any more credit until this clears up." "Pete, you know me." "Knew you," he corrected, and hung up. By the time I pulled into the shop parking lot, Mark was already there, leaning against his BMW with 2 coffee cups and that smile of his, like he'd been expecting this moment. "Rough morning?" he asked, holding out a cup. "Heard about the auditors. They can be real bulldogs once they sink their teeth in." I followed him into my office, though it was starting to feel less like mine with each passing hour. The forklift beeps from the warehouse kept time like some kind of countdown clock, while Mark settled into the chair across from my desk. "Listen," he said, pulling out a folder. "I know this looks bad, but I've got a solution that'll make everything go away. One clean transaction. That's all it takes." He slid a document across my desk, and I felt the heat rise behind my eyes as I read it. A purchase offer for my company, my life's work, at maybe a quarter of what it was worth. "I'll assume all the debt," Mark said, tapping the paper with a gold pen. "Keep the family name clean. It's the smart play here, Mike." The warehouse sounds faded away as I stared at that contract, remembering my daughter's words from yesterday. "Daddy, don't get in your car." Had she somehow sensed this coming? Kids pick up on things we miss sometimes, don't they? Mark set the pen down next to the signature line. "Offer expires tonight," he said, standing up. "Don't let pride get in the way of doing what's right for your family." I sat there as the daylight faded, that signature line staring back at me like an open grave. I slid the contract back across my desk, watching the paper skate over the polished wood. "It's not for sale, Mark. Not today. Not ever." His smile didn't vanish. It just sort of died, like a light bulb burning out. "You're making a mistake," he said, voice cooling about 20 degrees. "This is me throwing you a lifeline." "Thanks for the coffee," I replied, turning to my computer screen. The dismissal hung in the air between us until he finally stood up, tucking the contract back into his leather portfolio. "When you change your mind," he said from the doorway, "and you will, the price goes down every day you wait." The afternoon turned into a special kind of hell after that. You know how vultures circle before moving in? That's what those creditor calls felt like. Every time I picked up the phone, there was another vendor demanding payment, another supplier cutting off credit. The ones who'd known me longest hurt the worst. They didn't yell or threaten, just spoke with that disappointed tone that made me feel about 2 inches tall. Around 3, Jim, my warehouse supervisor for 8 years, knocked on my door frame. He had that look people get when they're delivering bad news they wish they didn't have to share. "Mike," he said, shifting his weight. "Thought you should know. Dave and Chris put in their notice. Said they found something with, more stable paychecks." I nodded, throat tight. Can't blame them. The phone rang again before he could respond. This time it was Sarah, calling from her sister's place. My wife's voice had that forced calm she uses when she's trying not to show how worried she is. "I talked to Mark," she said. "He explained everything. Maybe we should let him take over temporarily, just until this gets sorted out." The humiliation burned in my chest like acid reflux. "I've got it handled," I told her, knowing how hollow it sounded. "Do we still have savings?" she asked. "The kids' college fund?" "I'll call you back," I said, and hung up before she could hear how close my voice was to breaking. The rest of the day crawled by in slow motion. Every time I walked past the break room or the accounting office, conversations died mid-sentence. Folders disappeared into drawers, screens minimized. I'd gone from boss to pariah in less than 48 hours. I spent the last hour before closing stuffing ledgers and invoices into my bottom desk drawer, the one with the good lock. Hadn't needed to do that in 15 years of business, but nothing felt secure anymore. At 6:12, the bank's email landed like a digital tombstone. Subject line: account freeze confirmation and notice of intent. 30 days to make it right, or they'd start seizing assets. I printed it out, added it to my dispute file, and shut down for the night. The drive home felt longer than usual. Funny how silence gets heavier when you're carrying bad news. I laid Mark's purchase offer on the kitchen table. Couldn't bring myself to throw it away yet. It sat there like a loaded gun, waiting to see if desperation would make me pick it up again. Upstairs, Amy was already asleep, her stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm. standing in her doorway, watching her breathe. I remembered all those nights I'd told her that honest people always win in the end. Now I wasn't so sure anymore. My hand shook when I reached for the hall light switch. Wasn't fear exactly. More like that tremor you get when you're holding something too heavy for too long. Back downstairs, I sat in the dark, staring at my phone. Tom's number was right there in my contacts. He'd been my mentor, my accountant, the guy who taught me every smart business move I knew. If anyone could make sense of this mess. But my thumb hovered over that call button. Past midnight. Not quite ready to admit how bad things had gotten. Not yet. I didn't sleep much that night. When the first gray light started creeping through the kitchen window, I made the call. Tom answered on the second ring, like he'd been waiting. "I need your help," I said, my voice rougher than I meant it to be. "Things have gone sideways." There was a pause. Then that steady tone I remembered from every crisis he'd walked me through before. "I'll be there in 30 minutes. Have coffee ready." You ever notice how some people just bring calm with them? That's Tom. He showed up exactly when he said he would, carrying a worn leather briefcase and wearing the same kind of practical button-down he'd worn for the 20 years I'd known him. His reading glasses hung from his neck on one of those cords that always reminded me of my first-grade teacher. "Start from the beginning," he said, pulling out a yellow legal pad while I poured his coffee. "Every detail matters." I laid it all out. The note on my steering wheel, the mysterious withdrawals, Mark's sudden helpfulness, the bank freeze, and that lowball offer to buy me out. Tom didn't interrupt, just filled page after page with his precise handwriting, occasionally pushing his glasses up to study a document I'd handed him. "Show me the bank statements first," he said when I finished. He spread them across my desk, then pulled out a second pair of glasses, his detail work ones, as he called them. For the next hour, Tom moved between bank records and scanned loan documents with the focus of a surgeon. His pen kept circling things I'd missed. Timestamps, login patterns, signature quirks. Every now and then he'd mutter something like, "There it is," or, "Just as I thought." "Look here," he said finally, tapping a U sequence of numbers. "These vendor names, they're shells, empty companies. And these signatures?" He laid two documents side by side. "Same name, but the pressure points are different. Someone trying to copy your style, but not quite managing it." My stomach nodded. "How'd they get access?" "I only gave Mark view-only permissions." Tom's expression hardened. "View-only access is like leaving your diary out. If someone already has your banking credentials, they can see how you format everything, right down to how you sign digital forms." He underlined a word he'd written. "Complicity. Get me your whiteboard," he said. Together, we built a timeline, starting with that warning note. God, was that only 4 days ago? We mapped every incident. The withdrawals, the vendor calls, Mark's offers to help, the bank's review, the freeze. When we stepped back, the pattern was clear as daylight. Every time things got worse, Mark had been there first, ready with a solution that gave him more control. 21 days, Tom said, writing it in red at the bottom of the board. "That's what we've got until the bank moves on their deadline." He turned to me, and I saw that look he used to get when teaching me about audit trails and backup documentation. "We need more than suspicions, Michael. We need hard proof, either a confession or enough evidence for a forensic audit." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a fresh manila folder. With deliberate care, he wrote Mark across the tab. The sight of that name, so official and damning on that fresh folder, made me swallow hard. It was one thing to suspect your brother-in-law of sabotage. It was another to see 15 years of family ties reduced to an investigation file. "You taught me well," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Every invoice, every receipt, you kept it all," Tom nodded. "Now we use it." He laid out the folder between us, empty but somehow heavy with what we both knew it would soon contain. The truth was taking shape, and there was no turning back from it now. Looking at that folder, I remembered all those early mornings Tom had spent teaching me about paper trails and protecting myself. "Document everything," he'd always said, "because someday, you might need to prove what really happened." That someday had arrived. The next morning, Tom and I spread the ledgers across my desk like we were piecing together a jigsaw puzzle. The familiar smell of paper and ink reminded me of those early days when he'd first taught me about keeping proper books. Only now, we weren't building records. We were hunting through them for proof of sabotage. "Start with the digital archives," Tom said, adjusting his glasses. "People get sloppy with electronic files. They forget about metadata." He wasn't wrong. Within an hour, We found invoice folders with identical names, but different contents. Tom showed me how to check file properties, pointing out modification timestamps that didn't match our regular business hours. See these device IDs? He tapped the screen. Every computer leaves a fingerprint. And look at these edit times, all during those monitoring sessions Mark was so helpful with. I felt my jaw clench. Son of a... Document, don't react, Tom reminded me, sliding over a fresh legal pad. We're building a case, not a complaint. You know what's funny? For years I'd thought Tom was being overly cautious with his obsession about backup copies and audit trails. Now those habits were the only thing standing between me and disaster. We printed everything side by side. Original invoices next to the doctored versions. The differences were subtle, but damning. Altered dates, inflated amounts, vendor names that didn't quite match our regular suppliers. Tom showed me how to highlight the discrepancies in yellow, building what he called our presentation package. 21 days, I muttered, staring at the bank's letter. The timeline was crystal clear. If I couldn't disprove these loans by the deadline, they'd start seizing assets. I grabbed a calendar from my desk drawer and circled the date in red, then taped it right above my computer where I couldn't ignore it. We should request a formal review, I said, reaching for my letterhead. Tom nodded slowly. Just remember, banks tend to believe their own paperwork unless we can show them something that demands a deeper look. They're not on our side by default. I'll take that chance, I said, starting to type. Better than doing nothing. While I drafted the review request, Tom organized vendor statements into chronological order. We needed to show exactly when our legitimate payments stopped matching the bank's records. My office hadn't been this clean since opening day. Everything had to be ready for the bank's auditors to review without notice. My phone buzzed around 2 o'clock. Mark's name lit up the screen. Just checking in. Offer's still good if you've reconsidered. Clock's ticking. Tom reached over and snapped a photo of the message before I could reply. Evidence, he said simply, adding it to our growing file. The afternoon crept by in a blur of paperwork and growing dread. Every time I glanced at that calendar, another hour had slipped away. 20 days left now. 20 days to prove I wasn't a fraud, to save my company, to protect everything I'd built. I caught my reflection in the office window, circles under my eyes, worry lines I swore weren't there last week. How do you convince people you're honest when there's already a cloud of suspicion hanging over your head? One piece at a time, Tom said, reading my expression. That's how we'll build this case. One solid piece at a time. I nodded, turning back to the stack of documents we still needed to review. 20 days might seem like a lot of time, but when you're fighting to save everything you've worked for, every minute feels like it's burning away too fast. My phone buzzed again. Probably Mark, checking if his pressure was working. I left it face down on the desk. Right now, the only thing that mattered was the evidence in front of us, and the red circle on that calendar staring down from the wall. The next morning, I texted Mark to meet me at the shop after hours. Figured it was time to lay everything on the table, see how he'd react when cornered. You ever notice how the longest days are the ones where you're just waiting for a showdown? I spent the afternoon arranging printouts on my desk like playing cards, each one showing another piece of the puzzle Tom and I had pieced together. The timeline was clear as day once you knew what to look for. Every helpful intervention Mark had made, lined up neat and tidy with each disaster that followed. By 6 o'clock, the warehouse was quiet except for Miguel finishing up on the forklift, moving the last pallets into place for tomorrow. The beeping echoed through the empty space, making the whole building feel hollow. I remembered summer cookouts with the crew out back, Mark working the grill, playing the generous brother-in-law. Funny how memories can turn sour so fast. Mark strolled in around 6:30, looking relaxed as ever in his button-down and designer jeans. He dropped into the chair across from my desk like he owned it already. "What's on your mind, Michael?" He had that same easy smile he'd worn at my wedding. I laid out the evidence step by step. The login records, the altered documents, the timestamps that lined up with his monitoring sessions. Each piece another nail in the coffin of trust between us. You know what he did? He laughed. Just leaned back in that chair and actually laughed. "Come on, Michael. You're getting paranoid." He waved his hand like he was shooing away a fly. "Auditors always get creative with interpretations during tough quarters. It's just how the game works." "Game?" My voice came out harder than I meant it to. "This isn't a game, Mark. This is my life's work." I slid the metadata printout across the desk, the one showing his device ID all over the altered files. He barely glanced at it before flicking it back with 2 fingers, like it wasn't worth the paper it was printed on. You really think the bank's going to believe your amateur detective work over my expertise? He shook his head, almost looking sorry for me. I've handled dozens of corporate restructurings. They trust my competence a lot more than they trust your panic. The forklift beeped again in the distance. Funny how a normal workplace sound can suddenly feel like a countdown. Even Sarah thinks you're finished, he whispered, leaning forward. She called me yesterday, worried sick about the family savings, about Emily's college fund. My throat went dry. I'd built this company from nothing, preserved my good name through every challenge, stayed honest when it would have been easier not to. But right then, all that pride felt about as solid as tissue paper in the rain. Mark pulled out that damn purchase contract again, smooth and crisp like it was fresh from his printer. Look, I'm trying to help here. Better me than the vultures who'll pick over the bones once the bank moves in. At least this way, it stays in the family. He stood up, straightening his jacket like we'd just had a routine business meeting. Sleep on it, but don't sleep too long. Tick-tock, right? The door clicked shut behind him, and I sat there staring at that contract. The same one I'd refused before, now looking a whole lot more like a life preserver than a surrender. My hand shook a little as I picked it up, read through the terms again. The number was still insulting, but maybe. I pulled open my top desk drawer and slid the contract inside. Didn't sign it. Not yet, but I left it there, right where I could reach it, just in case. The warehouse was dead quiet now. Miguel must have finished up and gone home. I sat in my office, the weight of failure pressing down harder with every tick of the wall clock, wondering if this was what drowning felt like. I pulled into the driveway well past 8, the house dark except for the kitchen light. Sarah had left a plate for me under foil. Some kind of casserole, cold now. The kind of meal that would have tasted like love a month ago. Tonight it just tasted like distance. You ever notice how silence has different flavors? This one tasted bitter. Felt heavy in my throat like smoke. I pushed the food around with my fork, remembering Sunday dinners when laughter bounced off these walls. A floorboard creaked in the hallway, and there was Emily, her stuffed rabbit Mr. Hoppy tucked tight against her chest. She should have been asleep an hour ago, but those big brown eyes were wide awake, watching me like she could see right through to the tired spots in my soul. "Daddy," she whispered, and my heart caught because I knew what was coming. "Don't get in your car." The same warning she'd given that morning with the note, and every morning since. But this time it hit different, like one of those magic eye pictures suddenly snapping into focus. It wasn't about the car at all. It was about control, about who was really driving my life these days. "Come here, sweetheart." I pushed back from the table and she climbed into my lap, Mr. Hoppy and all. "Want to hear a story?" She nodded against my chest, and I told her about the little engine that could, her favorite. By the third, "I think I can," her breathing had gone soft and steady. I carried her back to bed, tucked her in with Mr. Hoppy standing guard, sitting on the edge of her bed, watching her sleep. Something inside me just broke, or maybe it finally came together. I pulled out my phone and called Tom. "I can't do this anymore," I said when he picked up. No hello, no small talk, just the raw truth bleeding out. Maybe I should sign it over before the bank takes everything. At least then Emily would still have Michael. Tom's voice was steady, the way it always was when he was about to say something important. "You remember what I taught you about steering through a skid? Turn into it," I said automatically. One of his favorite lessons, back when he was first showing me the ropes. "That's right. You don't fight it. You use the momentum. Let Mark steer himself right where we need him." "What do you mean?" "He wants to gloat. Men like that always do. So we give him the chance, somewhere neutral, somewhere he feels safe. Ask the right questions, let him talk, and record every word." My pulse picked up. "Is that legal?" "Single-party consent state," Tom said. "As long as one person in the conversation knows it's being recorded, we're clean. And once we have him on tape, we take it to the bank? Better, we take it to their auditors. Package it up nice and neat so they can't ignore it even if they wanted to." The plan started taking shape between us. The location, the questions, the timing. Tom walked me through it twice to make sure I had every detail locked down. When we hung up, I felt steady for the first time in weeks. I pulled out my phone again, typed out a message to Mark. "Been thinking about your offer. If the final terms look right, I'm ready to sign tomorrow. Name the time and place." Then I set my phone down and waited. Didn't have to wait long. 3 dots appeared almost immediately. Then, smart choice. Copper Creek Coffee, 10 a.m. I'll bring the papers. I screenshotted the exchange and sent it to Tom. Then I went to my home office and dug out the little digital recorder I used to use for client meetings. Tested the batteries, cleared the memory, set it next to my phone for morning. Looking at that recorder, I thought about Emily's warning again. Don't get in your car. Maybe what she really meant was, don't let someone else drive. Tomorrow, I'd take back the wheel. That's the thing about steering through a skid. You have to commit. No half measures, no hesitation. You turn into it hard and trust your instincts to carry you through. I got to Copper Creek Coffee 40 minutes early. Couldn't sleep anyway. So I figured I might as well put the time to use. The place was one of those renovated warehouses downtown. All exposed brick and steel beams, with enough ambient noise to make private conversations feel safe. Perfect for what we had planned. The morning rush was just tapering off when I walked in. You know that smell of coffee and warm pastries that hits you right at the door? Usually lifts my spirits, but that morning it just made my stomach clench tighter. I ordered black coffee, didn't trust my hands with anything fancier, and picked a table near the back where I could see both entrances. Tom showed up about 10 minutes later, chose a spot 2 tables away, and buried his nose in the morning paper like any other retiree enjoying his coffee. While I waited, I must have checked that recorder 30 times, kept slipping my hand into my jacket pocket, feeling for the little bump of the power button, making sure the LED was still blinking. The thing wasn't much bigger than a pack of gum, but it felt like I was smuggling a brick. Ever notice how time moves different when you're waiting for something big? Those 30 minutes stretched like taffy. I watched the baristas swap out the coffee urns, watched a kid drop his muffin, watched business people hurry in and out with their paper cups. Each time the door opened, my heart did this little skip. Then Mark walked in, right on time, wearing that $1,000 suit that always looked a little too polished for our town. He had his briefcase in one hand and his phone in the other, typing something as he walked. Probably another deal, another angle. Always working an angle, Mark was. He slid into the seat across from me with that same smooth confidence he'd had since college. "Michael," he set his briefcase down, ordered a cappuccino when the server came by. "Good to see you thinking clearly." I watched him pull out the contract, arrange it just so between the sugar packets. The same lowball offer, dressed up in fresh ink. My hands wanted to shake, but I kept them steady, around my coffee cup. Remember what Tom said? Let him drive. "Been thinking about everything," I said, keeping my voice casual. "Especially with the bank freeze and all. Pretty amazing how fast you got those loans processed. Must have good connections." Mark's smile widened just a fraction. "Relationships are everything in business. You know that. Thing is," I took a sip of coffee, "I don't remember signing any loan applications." He chuckled, leaned forward like he was sharing a secret. "That's the beauty of established business relationships. When you've got signatures on file, paperwork maintenance becomes flexible." The recorder felt hot in my pocket. "So you handled the paperwork yourself?" "Had to clean up some weak spots." He stirred his cappuccino, that smug little smile never wavering. "Banks need things presented a certain way before they'll act. You understand." I let the words hang there a moment, steam rising between us. Then, very carefully, "Just so I'm clear, you fabricated those loans under my name?" Mark set his spoon down, smirked at the table. The milk steamer behind the counter hissed like a warning, but he didn't hear it. "It's called survival, Michael. Business is evolving. You either adapt, or you get left behind." I felt the recorder's LED pulse against my ribs as I leaned forward. "And the withdrawals? The vendor accounts? Was that adaptation too?" As soon as Mark strutted out, I practically fell into my chair, hands shaking like I'd mainlined the whole pot of coffee. Tom was already heading my way, newspaper forgotten on his table. "Let's get some air," he said quietly, nodding toward the side door. The alley behind Copper Creek was quiet except for the hum of AC units. I fumbled the recorder out of my pocket, nearly dropped the damn thing twice before Tom steadied my hands. "Deep breath, Michael," he said. "We've got what we need. Let's make sure it's clear." We huddled near the brick wall, heads together like kids sharing a secret, and hit play. The recording wasn't studio quality, but every word cut through, even with that espresso machine throwing its fits in the background. When we got to Mark's bit about paperwork maintenance and signatures on file, Tom's eyebrows shot up. "That's our smoking gun," he said, tapping the recorder. "He just admitted to document falsification. Here, let me get this to the bank right now." Tom pulled out his tablet, fingers moving with surprising speed for a retiree. He attached the audio file to an email, then started adding everything else we'd gathered. The timeline we'd built, those metadata printouts showing Mark's access patterns, screenshots of his texts about the purchase offer. The whole ugly story, wrapped up neat and tidy. "Adding a formal review request," Tom muttered, typing away. "Marking it urgent. and sent. We must have stood there for 10 minutes, just staring at that tablet screen, waiting. Then the bank's reply popped up. They wanted a call. Today. The next hour was a blur of technical questions. The audit team wanted to know everything about the recording. What device we'd used, how we'd maintained custody of the file, whether we could verify the voice. They were especially interested in the device IDs we'd tracked, matching them against their own login records. Then they played the recording again. When they got to Mark's smug little speech about cleaning up weak spots, one of the auditors cut in. "Stop there," she said. "Play that section again." Yes, that phrasing matches language patterns we found in the questionable loan documents. "Mr. Whitaker, this recording warrants immediate fraud escalation under our internal policies." I had to grip the alley wall for support. First real breath I'd taken in weeks, felt like. The lead auditor's voice turned formal. "We'll need you to preserve all related accounts and documents for forensic review, and please avoid any contact with Mark Sullivan until further notice. Can you confirm you understand?" "Yes," I managed. Crystal clear. After the call ended, Tom helped me save copies of everything to 3 different drives. "Redundancy," he said with a small smile. "Learned that lesson the hard way back in '82. We sat on a bench outside the coffee shop for a while after that, watching traffic slide by in the late afternoon sun. Felt strange, really. The world just going about its business while my whole life hung on what would happen next. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart jumped. Finally, around 4:30, the bank's email arrived. "Please appear tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. sharp." 7 words. Didn't say if they were going to help me or hang me out to dry. Just 7 words and a whole night of wondering ahead. Tom squeezed my shoulder. "Whatever happens tomorrow, we've got proof now. Real, solid proof. Try to remember that tonight." I nodded, watching the sun glare off passing windshields. The recorder sat heavy in my pocket, like a grenade with the pin half pulled. All we could do now was wait and see if it would be enough to blow Mark's whole house of cards down. Next morning, I walked into the bank at 8:55 with Tom beside me, carrying a box of ledgers that felt heavier than it should. You know that weird calm that hits sometimes when everything's on the line? That's where I was. Steady hands, clear head. Like I'd stepped outside, myself, to watch it all unfold. The security guard didn't even check our IDs, just waved us straight through to a corner office where 3 people in suits waited. They had this methodical way about them. Reminded me of mechanics I'd known who could diagnose an engine problem just by listening to it run. "Mr. Whitaker," the woman in the center said, gesturing to the chairs. "I'm Sandra Chen, lead forensic auditor. We'll need to document everything you've brought." For the next hour, they cataloged every piece of paper, every digital file, every device we'd used. They logged serial numbers, timestamps, chain of custody. Felt like being in one of those crime scene shows, but with spreadsheets instead of yellow tape. "The conference room will be more suitable for the audio review," Chen said, leading us down a hallway lined with glass walls. Made me think of an aquarium, except we were the ones on display. The recording played crystal clear through their system. Every few seconds, someone would tap keys or make notes. They kept stopping at specific phrases, especially when Mark talked about cleaning up weak spots, and signatures already on file. "Cross-reference these segments," Chen told her team. "The language patterns align with our fraud taxonomy markers." She turned to me. "Mr. Whitaker, this corroborates the irregularities we found in the original loan documentation." A man in a darker suit stepped in. Turned out to be Jeffrey Morton, the bank's lead counsel. He had that careful way of speaking lawyers do, like each word might explode if handled wrong. "Given the evidence presented," he said, "we'll be notifying appropriate authorities. The account restrictions related to the questioned loans will be lifted pending investigation." Tom squeezed my shoulder as I logged into the portal. There it was. My account. Alive again. First time I'd seen black numbers instead of red in weeks. Felt like breaking surface after being underwater too long. "Breathe," Tom whispered. "But remember, investigations move at their own pace." Back at the shop, I gathered the crew that had stuck with me. Kept it simple, stuck to facts. The bank's found evidence of fraud. They're investigating. We're back in business. Didn't mention Mark by name. Didn't have to. The relief on their faces said enough. My phone buzzed around 2 o'clock. "Mark. Last chance. Sign the sale agreement today or watch it all burn." I screenshot it, added it to the evidence folder, and walked out to the loading dock. Trucks were backing in like any normal afternoon. Air brakes hissing, forklifts beeping their steady rhythm. Felt good, watching the place breathe again. The bank's email came just before closing. Formal complaint filed with regulatory authorities. Please expect contact regarding cooperating witness statements. I was shutting down my computer when the news alert popped up. Local business figure under investigation for alleged loan fraud. No names yet, but the blue light from my phone screen lit up the dark office like a promise. The next morning hit different. You ever notice how some days feel like turning points before you even get out of bed? This was one of those. My phone was already buzzing with notifications when I reached for it. Local executive Mark Davidson charged in major fraud scheme. The headline blazed across my screen. Below it, a photo of Mark being led into the courthouse. His smooth smile nowhere in sight. The article detailed how bank auditors had delivered compelling audio evidence and extensive digital documentation to prosecutors. Felt surreal, seeing it all laid out in black and white. Remember those business awards dinners where Mark used to work the room like a pro? Well, those same circles were sharing that coffee shop recording everywhere now. Local business forums, LinkedIn, even the Chamber of Commerce message boards. His confession was spreading faster than his lies ever did. Davidson admitted to forging signatures and fabricating loan documents. One post read, followed by the actual clip. The comments section was a graveyard of former praise. Vendors who'd ghosted me were falling over themselves to publicly distance from him. We were misled by Mr. Davidson's claims, one wrote. Our faith in Whitaker Industries never wavered, claimed another. Which was pretty rich, considering how fast they'd pulled their contracts. Ever seen a reputation crumble in real time? It's something else, like watching a house of cards collapse in slow motion. Except each card was a lie Mark had carefully stacked over the years. Around 10, my inbox pinged with emails from the bank. Documents restoring my full account access, cancellation papers for those bogus loans. Everything with urgent tags. I spent an hour signing and initialing, each signature feeling more solid than the last. Then came the harder part. Letters to every client explaining what happened. Kept it clean and factual. Following a forensic audit, evidence of unauthorized activity. Bank has cleared all related charges. No gloating, no accusations. Just the truth, which was all I'd wanted from the start. You know that smell of fresh coffee that hits right when you need it most? That's what I caught when Tom pushed through my office door around lunch. He had 2 cups and that quiet smile of his. Sounds like a working warehouse out there, he said, nodding toward the loading dock where forklifts were running full tilt. Getting there, I told him, accepting the coffee. Truth's doing its job now, he said, settling into the chair across from me. Worst part's behind you. First thing I did after clearing the books was set up bonus payments for the crew that stuck it out. Not huge amounts, but enough to show I remembered who stood where when things got rough. Called every supplier too, rebuilt those bridges one conversation at a time. Amazing how much easier people listen when you've got proof backing your word. That evening, instead of heading straight home, I pulled into Classic Cars and Customs on Baker Street. There she was. 67 Mustang, restored to gleaming. Been eyeing her for months even before all this started. The price tag that seemed impossible a few weeks ago now felt like a promise I could finally keep to myself. She's yours if you want her, the dealer said, dangling the keys. Just got her detailed yesterday. The paperwork took 20 minutes. The drive home felt like victory lap. When I pulled into our driveway, my daughter was already bouncing on the front steps. She ran over, grabbed my hand, and just stared at that chrome, grinning like she'd helped pick it out herself. Pretty car, Daddy, she said, squeezing my fingers. I ran my other hand along the front fender, catching our reflection in that polished steel. My daughter, my wife in the doorway, our home behind us, everything where it belonged. The honest man always wins in the end, I told them. And for the first time in weeks, every word rang true.